You're in the water loop.
Water loop, water loop, water loop.
Waterloop is made possible in part by grants from Springpoint Partners and the Walton Family Foundation.
Water loop.
The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by Flume. It's the perfect device for tracking your home's water use in real time on your smartphone. It's so easy to use. You just attach a small device to your water meter using a band, the same way you put a watch on your wrist. Then you connect to Wi-Fi, you download the app, and you're up and running. It's as simple as that. You don't need a plumber. You don't need to cut into any of your pipes or water lines. Very easy to set up. Then you can set water budgets, how much you want to use each day or week. It'll keep track of that. It'll tell you what's going on in your house with water use minute by minute. It'll send alerts to you if there's excessive water use or if it suspects a leak. In fact, when I installed Flume at my house, it told me almost right away about a leak. I was losing a gallon of water every 6 minutes. I'm honestly not sure when I would have found that without Flume. You can use promo code WATERLOOP for 10% off at flumewater.com.
Water loop.
Hey everyone, this is Travis with Waterloop. I want to talk to you for just a minute about High Sierra shower heads. I use them in my house because they're a water efficient fixture, but I'm a big fan for other reasons as well, including their design and construction. They're made of solid metal. So this High Sierra shower head I have in my hand right now, you can tell that it's a quality, well-made product, unlike the vast majority of shower heads, which involve a lot of plastic in their construction. And that's something we need less of, right? Less consumer products with plastic in them. The other awesome thing is their nozzle design. It's a unique patented nozzle that's not going to clog like so many other shower heads. The other thing about this nozzle is that it will work in low pressure. You'll still get a strong, powerful, but water-efficient shower. Use promo code LOOP20 for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. There has been a lot of attention on the Colorado River Basin for many years, the challenges with water supply and everything, but it seems like there's a lot more recently. I'm very happy to be joined by Ted Kowalski. He is with the Walton Family Foundation as the Colorado River Initiative Lead and a Senior Program Officer. Ted, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I want to just talk to you about what I think I've seen in the news sitting over here on the East Coast recently. It seems that there's even more concern, rising concern for the way climate change and drought and arid conditions are taking a toll in the Colorado River Basin. I know this has been a story for years. People have seen the photos of the different reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the white lines, and have seen stories, but I've just seen a lot in the past month or two. What's going on?
Yeah, well, the Colorado River Basin for decades now has been really experiencing drier hydrology. We believe it's in part due to climate change, and really only through better, more coordinated water management have we been able to keep Lakes Powell and Lake Mead right about 50%. But this year, we're seeing even more dramatic, difficult hydrology. We're seeing it through soil moisture that is dropping. And so, for example, last year, the hydrology was just under average, and yet when you saw the flows meter out across the past 6 months or so, we saw closer to 50% of the runoff that we would expect to see. And so really that soil moisture was sopping up that water. We're consuming more. It's a warmer, drier conditions that we're experiencing, and some have called it sort of an aridification of the Colorado River Basin, where we're seeing less hydrology and warmer temperatures, sort of a hot, drier future, and that's making our water challenges very difficult.
I mean, is the current situation kind of setting off alarms for people?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, water managers pay attention to this information on a day-to-day basis. But I think even the public is starting to recognize how difficult this hydrology is, how important water is for the southwestern United States. And today, there are significant portions of the basin throughout the 7 basin states, which includes Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and California, who are in severe drought or exceptional drought conditions. And those maps, if you will, are being realized and experienced by everyday public. And I think people are starting to really pay attention.
Yeah. And these are very beautiful, amazing states and parts of the country, and have been popular for people to move to, Colorado and Arizona. And I imagine that those trends are continuing too, right? You still have rising populations and continued development putting forces on this.
Yeah, without a doubt, there's a significant amount of growth occurring within the Colorado River Basin. I think 3 of the Colorado River Basin states are in the top 10 in terms of most rapid growth or population moving to those states. And so you have additional pressures on the water supplies at a time when the water supplies are less secure, and we're at a time where the water supplies tend to be shrinking, in part because of those increased temperatures, increased consumptive use by crops, and other factors. And so really, it's going to take a lot more creativity. And, we're trying to ensure at the Walton Family Foundation that we're able to develop appropriate water management solutions that take into account the environment and also are climate change resilient, if you will.
Sure. The other thing I've seen in the news recently is about more negotiations, more work or fresh work, renewed work on agreements among the states in the basin for water use. I'd love to hear about that process that I think is kicking off again, that might take a few years to get to the new agreement.
Certainly. And in my previous role, I worked for the state of Colorado, representing Colorado in the Colorado River negotiations in the early 2000s. And I will tell you, back then, there wasn't a meeting that we would go to where litigation wasn't bandied about by one state or another, or one basin or another, or between the United States and Mexico. However, the basin states and the U.S. and Mexico and others came together in 2007 and adopted rules for how we were going to manage the Colorado River in a better, more holistic way. And those rules have really demonstrated how effective you can be if you're working together, if you're collaborating, but they expire in 2025. And so by the rule's own terms, the Bureau of Reclamation, who's the water master in the lower part of the basin and who manages the 2 largest reservoirs, Lakes Powell and Lakes Mead, are initiating new rulemaking to revisit the rules that were adopted back in 2007 and see if there are changes or additional tweaks or additional changes that they can make to better manage our water supplies in the face of the challenges we see ahead of us.
Yeah. So you've been involved in and around these negotiations and agreements for a couple decades now. How has the tenor changed, or how has the actual nuts and bolts changed? You mentioned there might be more collaborative spirit at this point. Just how has it evolved?
Yeah, I definitely believe it's a lot more collaborative. I think when you look at the challenges and sort of the positions that individual states and individual basins and quite frankly, the United States and Mexico were taking back in the early 2000s, it was a lot more competitive. It was seen as a take it or leave it, or sort of a zero-sum game that you can only succeed if you take more and you take it from a different state, or you take it from a different basin or a different country or a different sector. And really, since 2007, we've developed a much more collaborative approach to I would say, a more empathetic approach, recognizing that we all need to be able to manage our water supplies and to be able to use less water, and that we ought to be encouraging water conservation as sort of a philosophy, that we ought to be encouraging water conservation as opposed to the old tenet of the West, which was use it or lose it. And really, it sort of penalized you, in laws and policy. If you didn't use your water, you were penalized in some way. And I think there's been this new approach, and it's existing across the states and both U.S. and Mexico. There's been this building, I think 2007, the states came together and said, yeah, we're all going to work together to try to survive as a basin. And then in 2012, the United States and Mexico signed a binational agreement, a 5-year agreement, and then another agreement 5 years later through these minutes, Minute 319 and Minute 323, whereby they said, yeah, we're going to try to use less water. And the U.S. allowed Mexico, if they conserve their water, to be able to store that water in advance for subsequent use, which had never really been done. And then subsequent to that, NGOs and tribes have added to the conversation. And there's just been more and more collaboration, most recently with the drought contingency plans, but we can talk about that in a little later.
Sure. One of the things that you've talked about is these different stakeholders and different groups, right? There needs to be water for the cities, the residents, and the municipalities. Agriculture is a massive user and really important. But we've talked before. You talked about there needing to be more priority on the health of the river itself, and the river shouldn't have to necessarily settle for leftovers in these negotiations. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most dramatic examples was with Minute 319, which was between the United States and Mexico. And while that agreement talked about how Mexico could conserve water and save it in U.S. reservoirs and take it at later times, which was really just sort of a dramatic way that Mexico could be more in control of their future, that they weren't just receiving an annual allocation each and every year, but rather they could manage their water across years by using storage in another country. But one of the things that came out of that agreement was the ability for Mexico to store water in U.S. reservoirs and release it for a pulse flow. Many people don't know this, but the Colorado River no longer flows to the sea on an typical basis. And for the first time in decades, the U.S. and Mexico and environmental groups were able to collaborate and work with water users to recreate a flow to the sea for the first time purposefully, really in decades. And I use that as an example to help folks understand the dramatic nature of the problems we're facing, but also to see that we can create the change that we want to see. It just takes political will, just takes creativity and folks working together to provide for water for the environment. And I think there's other examples like that throughout the Colorado River Basin that, when we work together, I think we're going to be able to provide for this river that provides for all of us to live here and survive here.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the most amazing examples of that illustrates, I guess, the strain on that river is that it doesn't reach its natural terminus into the ocean, and that just tells the story right there. One of the other big pressures, I mentioned agriculture, is this choice, I guess, between having a healthy river and having a thriving agricultural economy. I think you'd say that is a false choice, right?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that to my core. I believe we can have a healthy agricultural economy and healthy rivers. And, one of the best examples of that was some work that we did with the Grand Valley water users in Colorado, right at the Colorado-Utah state border. And the Grand Valley Water Users Association had aging infrastructure. It's a challenge that many water providers face. This infrastructure was almost a century old, and they had needs specifically. We were trying to experiment and see if there are ways to conserve water in ways that will actually benefit rivers. And the Grand Valley water users stepped up and said, yeah, we want to experiment a little bit with this, see if this is a tool that potentially could be useful. And they had so much interest from their farmers and ranchers to participate in this temporary fallowing or deficit irrigation, where basically they would grow one crop instead of two in a given year, and then have that conserved water go into the river. And they had so much interest that they needed to develop a lottery to actually see which farmers and ranchers could participate. Remarkably, they participated, and that water that they conserved was able to flow through their hydropower plant and generate hydropower instead of going to grow crops. It fed into the Colorado River just upstream of critical habitat for endangered fish, so it provided environmental benefits. Downstream, there's a lot of rafting that occurs in that area, and those flows were able to help support some of the rafting economy that was going on there. And the money that went to that association, some of it went to the farmers themselves who had changed their practices, but some of that money went back to repair some of their aging infrastructure. And so really it was a win-win-win-win solution. Ultimately, that water flowed down to Powell to lift up the water security benefits of the entire upper basin. And so, it's just one example, but I really do think that if you are thinking outside of your individual needs or your individual interests and think more broadly, there are solutions that we can develop that can benefit economies, can benefit farmers and ranchers, can benefit cities, and can benefit the environment.
Yeah, fantastic. I know that I've seen a lot of different kind of stories like this, where different farmers, different ranchers are partnering with organizations to try innovative ways. If there's any others to share, that'd be interesting. And I know also there's some science-based projects that farmers and ranchers are involved in too, right?
Yeah, no, there certainly are. We're doing a project with Google and NASA and EDF and others, the Desert Research Institute, looking at using satellite imagery to help determine consumptive use of different crops. And I think it's a valuable tool to farmers because, where they might have just acted because Farmer Joe down the way was starting to put on their sprinklers and they thought, oh, Farmer Joe may know something I don't know. They might turn on their sprinklers, but this is really science-based to say, actually, your crop is consuming all that it needs to, and you can save money and water and energy by not turning on your sprinklers because your crops don't need it based on scientific data. But we're using that tool along with some farmers within the Colorado River Basin. Paul Boucher is a perfect example there. And they're working in the upper Colorado River Basin to see how those consumptive use numbers are changing from what the satellites determine and what they're seeing on the ground. And they're also looking at the productivity. Does it affect their productivity if they grow, one crop of hay as opposed to two, in the following year or in 2 years down the road? Or does it the productivity stay the same, or does it go up, or how does it affect the agriculture or farmer rancher business model? And are these things that we can adopt? And it really is geographic specific, and we need some specific examples to actually make those longer term, bigger changes in policy.
Yeah. I love hearing about the use of technology in that way, satellites and Google and everything. There's certainly a role. I've saw some story just very recently about using surveillance to, I think, measure groundwater out in California. I saw something about some low-flying drones being involved in siting stream restoration stuff in Pennsylvania. So, got to use this technology to our benefit, that's for sure. One of the other big stakeholders that we had talked about before are the indigenous communities in the basin, and I'm really curious about maybe what their historic role or lack of a role was in kind of the water agreements and management.
Almost 100 years ago, when the Colorado River Compact was adopted, which is really the foundational document of the law of the river, tribes were not asked to participate in those negotiations. They were not represented in those negotiations, and really it was a negotiation between and among the basin states and the federal government. Since then, tribes' voice has been continuing to grow, and both in importance and, I would say the culmination of recent tribal influence and tribal voice was with regard to the drought contingency plans. There was a critical, these are a set of agreements that were just adopted by the U.S., by Mexico, and by the basin states to say, if our reservoirs continue to drop, we're going to conserve even more. And here's how we're going to meter out those shortages across the various states. Well, the state of Arizona was a critically important state, and they were only able to get a drought contingency plan adopted by including the tribes, by the tribes sort of stepping up and saying, we will conserve additional water if we can be compensated for it, and we can use that additional water to make sure that we have enough secure, reliable supplies for the city of Phoenix and Tucson and the rest of Arizona. And so tribes stepping up in that way has been, remarkably important recently. And I think we need to continue to develop the voice of tribes. There are parts of our country, particularly on tribal reservations, where people are still hauling water. And so we need, tribes to be part of our conversation, but we also need to live up to the commitments of ensuring, water equity, ensuring that tribes have safe, clean drinking water for their communities. And there are all sorts of ways that we can sort of meet those needs if we work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that situation in some of those communities was especially tough during the coronavirus pandemic, where water and sanitation was so critical that they were hit hard in part because of the water situation. So it takes me to, I guess, one of the last things I want to talk to you about. You've mentioned about water as a human right, which is something you don't hear as much in the context of the United States and in the developed world. You hear it more, about the developing world and places in Africa and India. Why do you think that phrase, should be used in water conversations in the States?
Yeah, it's a really potent question.
Yeah.
I think what it really does for me is it brings it home. It personalizes the issue. And recently, there have been some charges brought against some political leaders in Michigan for failures associated with the Flint water crisis. And, the challenges that community faced and the challenges that we face on reservations within the Colorado River Basin and the challenges that we face in some disadvantaged communities within California or Arizona as well, it's really, it's a moral, it's an ethical, issue. And we really need to step up as a community, as a country, to ensure that all people have access to adequate, safe, clean, reliable drinking water. And, I think the way that you can get there in part is by using words and by recognizing that it really is a human right. We all need water. And I would expand it to say, it's not just a human right, but it's a right of nature. I mean, our natural world depends on water for its mere survival. And so we just need to think more holistically about how we provide for communities, for people, and also for nature, in terms of safe, clean, reliable drinking water.
And maybe there's a recognition of that has kind of led in part to some of this increased collaboration across the Colorado River Basin, that people need this water, the river needs the water, the indigenous communities need the water, and that we've got to come together to make that happen. So, well, Ted, I look forward to keeping an eye on everything happening out there. There's always so much going on. There's so many stories, so many great examples, I think, that need to be held up so others can follow after them. I appreciate your time and perspective so much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the work that you do to really share these stories across the country, across the world, and just help us all, develop better solutions. So Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. A special thanks to Waterloop supporters Spring Point Partners and the Walton Family Foundation. The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish way to save energy, water, and money while enjoying a powerful shower. Save 20% with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com. Waterloop is also sponsored by Flume, the smart water monitor that tracks your home's water use in real time and provides data on your smartphone. Save 10% with promo code WATERLOOP at flumewater.com. If you like Waterloop, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on social media and visit waterloop.org to sign up for updates.
You're in the water loop.